My name's Gary, I'm an addict. Microphone. I still find this the most difficult thing I've ever done in recovery is to talk about me. Still. You know, and I've been coming to these meetings a long time and I still get the most incredible fear that comes over me when I talk about me. You know, because it's the last person I want to talk about. It's a little bit easier doing it from here because it's not so much about me. It's about trying to carry a message to somebody who wants a message or want to hear a message, even if it's just one person. You know, it took me a long time to even get into the habit of sharing, and I still fight against it. But I know for me, when I do share, is that I get something very therapeutic, some kind of release. I don't know what it is, I just feel better when I share in a meeting. Because I came to these meetings for a long time and never ever spoke. Ever. You know. I wouldn't talk to anybody in the meetings and I would drift out of the room pretty quickly, just in case somebody asked me how I was feeling. Because they didn't know how I was feeling. I had no idea on how I was feeling. I spent a lot of my life not feeling. You know, I want to talk about my journey and just my journey. You know, this is the way that I've done it, and that's it. You know, I started coming to Narcotics Anonymous because I didn't want to take drugs. This is my 10th year of recovery, and I still come to Narcotics Anonymous because I don't want to take drugs. There's nothing changed in there. Maybe different things are going on in my life today, and the compulsion to use went a long time ago. But for me, baseline is I'm a drug addict. I want to use, you know. Otherwise, people wouldn't be going back out there after long periods of time and dying from using drugs. For me, that's my default setting. You know, I will go and use, I will pick up. And I only know that too well. I've never been in a treatment centre. I've never been in a detox. I got clean through Narcotics Anonymous. That's just my story. That's nothing to say against treatment centres. I don't really have an opinion about it. I really don't. As long as somebody makes it here, it doesn't really matter. You know, like the old saying, we all arrive in different ships, but we're all in the same boat. You know, and that's true. It doesn't matter as long as we're here. You know, and I have never felt comfortable anywhere else out there in that world than I do in this one. You know, it's my time to reflect and sit back and you know, try to get well, and that's a full-time job for me. You know, like I said, I've been coming to this fellowship a long time. And it's been a very slow process. You know, it's been my process, and I've done it not very willingly. You know, I've kicked and screamed through chunks of my recovery. I kicked and screamed about this program in the beginning. You know, when I came to this fellowship, as much as I loved what was going on and the people in the room and the identification, I was completely and utterly terrified. You know, I saw things about God on the wall, you know, lots of readings, lots of very strange formats, you know, lots of really weird sayings. You know, and I came to NA for a little while, and I went back out and did it my own way. You know, and that was part of my journey as well. And I'll speak a little bit more about that later. You know, I was really touched about your story, Sean, about growing up in that environment. You know, and it's something that I've been reflecting on recently is about my childhood. Because it's only really after 10 years that I'm actually even starting to get any feelings, and I'm starting to thaw out, and that things are starting to come up. Feelings that I've never actually felt before. You know, that sometimes that my feelings are so powerful, I actually want to be sick, and I've never had that. I've never been in a situation like that before in my life, and as much as I hate it, I welcome it in a way because it's new. I don't know, it's good for me, you know. And I want to get to a point where I can break down and just surrender to it and cry and do whatever I need to do, because I've got a lot of grieving to do. I've got a lot of grief that I need to get out. You know, I grew up in an environment that didn't have any addictive relatives. You know, my mother was straight as the days long. My stepfather was not an alcoholic. You know, he wasn't an addict. You know, my father wasn't either. Nobody in my family was an addict. But it was a very, very abusive childhood. I had a stepfather who was quite sadistic. And for me, in some ways, is that I think that if he was abusive and alcoholic, I could be able to label him and I could justify that. But because he wasn't, and he was quite a sadistic person, it was difficult for me to label that person. But I grew up in an environment where I was surrounded by people but absolutely got no attention whatsoever. You know, I was just left. My mother was unavailable. My stepfather ridiculed me continuously from the age of 4 to the age of 16. As a child, I wet the bed till I was probably till 11 or 12, and the amount of shame that was heaped on me for being like that I thought I was completely abnormal. You know, only to find out many, many years later that actually wasn't not abnormal at all. It was quite normal. And the shame and the ridicule that was heaped on me through that period of time caused me to draw in. I just shut off from everything around me, you know, to protect myself. You know, I just went to that small place within myself and, you know, and for me, what I did is that, you know, I wasn't getting any love in the home that I was in. And as a child, all I ever really want, or I ever think a child wants, is love and attention and to be nurtured, you know. And I don't think when you get that, you'll go and seek it out elsewhere, you know. And for me, I sought it out in gang culture. You know, I got involved with gangs. You know, there were certain kinds of behaviour that I had to participate in to be welcomed into that gang culture. But I think when you're a child looking for acceptance and love, is you're willing to pay whatever price you need to be accepted. You know, and I did what I needed to do to be accepted into that culture, because at least I was accepted. At least I felt like I was wanted and belonged. You know, so I got involved in gangs and gang violence and football violence and violence with the police. You know, and my life just sort of like really progressed from there. You know, it was a very natural path to start picking up things like alcohol. You know, when the alcohol didn't really do it for me, I'd mix it with things like Actifed-Linctus and any other cough medicine that would give me a kick. You know, and I would use glue, or it didn't matter. I used everything. I used to go into chemists or any other kind of hardware shop and found out what got you high, and I would get high. And a lot of the drugs I used, I hated, but anything was better than some of those feelings that I had going on inside. Some of those, that what was going on inside of me, it was better to take anything to escape from all that. And you know, and I did that, and I carried on that lifestyle, and I, you know, and for me it was a case of detention centres, youth custodies, youth offenders institutes, and prisons and remand centres, and in and out for my adolescence. You know, I've been to prison a few times, not as many as some, but I can count the time in years. You know, and very simply, my behaviour just progressed. You know, and I moved on to harder and harder drugs, and I came to London with my brother in 1989, and I started picking up other drugs, you know, Phyceptone, Ritalin, pills, started using heroin, everything that I could get my hands on. And I always know for me that I'm an addict. I have no problems with saying that I'm an addict, because every single thing that I ever used, I used it to absolute extreme. I took amphetamine until I had a stroke, and then I took it again and got another stroke, and then I kept taking it. You know, I took heroin till I overdosed. I took whatever I needed to take. You know, it didn't matter. You know, I have no one drug that's a favourite. Whatever changed the way I felt was sufficient, no matter how horrible that was. And some drugs I enjoyed using. You know, I'd be a liar to say that I didn't enjoy using some drugs, because I did, quite frankly. You know, I enjoyed smoking crack cocaine, I enjoyed taking heroin. You know, I'm a drug addict. But the consequences of what I do when I take those drugs are so extreme that I had to do something about that. You know, if I could get away with taking certain kinds of drugs without the consequences, I'd probably still be using, and that's just the bare truth. You know, I came here because I was absolutely broken because of my behaviour, you know, and what drugs led me to do. You know, so I picked up all these different kinds of drugs, you know, and I kind of got scripts, and I kept committing more crime, and I started using crack a hell of a lot more than I'd previously done, and I became psychotic. I mean, I'd lost it big time. I didn't eat food. Food wasn't really important anymore. If I needed food, I'd rob a neighbour. I didn't take care of my hygiene. Clothes weren't really important. If I needed a cigarette, I would just take cigarette ends off the street and make a cigarette, because every penny that I could get my hands on went on my drug using, went on smoking. In the end, mainly towards crack. You know, I'm kind of grateful that I picked up crack when I did, because that might be a mad thing to say, that I'm grateful for crack, is it absolutely ripped me apart. Whereas I was going along nice and steady for years and years and years, taking lots of other kinds of drugs on prescription, getting my maintenance. You know, I could have carried on doing that for a hell of a long time. Crack absolutely ripped me apart in quite a short space of time, and I'm quite glad it did, you know, because it took me to the most insane place I can even imagine. So I was, you know, I didn't eat food. I don't even remember how much I weighed. Probably 8 stone, if not less. I was committing burglaries and robberies every single day. You know, I was living some squat. You know, I was just completely lost soul, completely and utterly lost. And I think subconsciously I knew that I was dying. You know, even though the picture was pretty clear to everybody else, is that subconsciously I knew that it was over for me. You know, I was 25 years of age and I was dying. It was, you know, it was quite simple. You know, subconsciously I was trying to get a get-out clause. I was trying to get help from somewhere. I have a strange way of getting help. I didn't know where to get help from, apart from going to the doctor, but the doctor would just give me more drugs. I never thought that I could go to a treatment centre, because I never could realistically think I would ever get clean in one. So I usually go back to the place that I was quite familiar with, which is rooms without doors, without handles on the inside. And not as though you can't get drugs in those places, but I always found it easier to stop using in prison than I did anywhere else, because I could just shut the door, shut everything out, and just get on with it. You know, I've never found stopping using drugs difficult. What I found difficult was staying stopped. I've never ever been able to stay stopped. I can stop for a very short period of time, but at some point I pick up. And I went and burgled this restaurant in South London, and I got a lot of cash out of it. I thought, great. Went out, used it, and you know, my psychology, the way it is that I thought that, okay, well, it worked that night, I'll go and do it again. So I went and did the same restaurant the following day and got some more money. Okay, I went and used that, and then my thinking hadn't changed very much, so I thought I'd go and do the same restaurant again on the third day, and decided that'd be a good idea. 1, 2, 3. It all seemed very logical at the time. And I ended up breaking into this restaurant, and all of a sudden I hear lots of noise. So now the police station is opposite this particular restaurant. So they didn't have very far to come. I obviously walked into some trap that they'd set up. Wasn't really difficult, was it? Let's set a trap for this burglar. Maybe he'll come back. And he did. So a trap was laid for me, and the next minute, half of this particular police station came steaming into this restaurant, and I didn't know what to do. So I thought it'd be a really good idea to hide in the bin of kidney beans, a dustbin. And I thought that beans were this high, I can get in the bottom of there. Didn't think about displacement at the time and where all these beans are going to go. So I'm kind of half hanging out of a bean, thinking I was quite convincingly hiding myself. And then the police walked in, and I couldn't believe it when they saw me. And off I went. And that there are some funny parts of the story, and I look at it and I do laugh in my insanity. And I ended up in a police station, very familiar place, and in a really, really, really incredibly desperate state, because I couldn't figure out how I got there. Not so much that particular time, but how I kept ending up in the same situation in a cell, knowing that I'm going to go away for for a number of years. Why do I keep coming back to the same place? And probably for the first time in my life, it drew on me that maybe using drugs had something to do with it. And the getting and using drugs, the consequences of, got me into that situation. And and I tried to kill myself in that cell. I tried to hang myself, and I made quite a serious attempt. I damaged my throat quite badly, because I didn't know any other way to live my life. I didn't want to use drugs because it kept doing this to me, and I had absolutely no idea on this planet how not to use drugs. I spent a lot of time around people who were very highly qualified in using drugs, including myself. Spoke a lot about what we're going to do when we're going to stop using drugs, how life is going to be, how good it's going to be when we stop using drugs, but it never happened. The fact is, why would anybody who stopped using drugs hang around with somebody who is using drugs? I'm never going to see those people, so I'd never come into contact with anybody who stopped using drugs. I just thought I had no way out, and the pain that I was in, I thought that the only choice really was death. At least I wouldn't feel anything. At least I wouldn't have to deal with these feelings, and deal with alienating my family and just losing everything again and going through all that mad trauma. I wanted out, and I thought suicide was a pretty viable option. And I went back through the system. I went back through the prison system, and I got stuck on this wing in a certain prison. They used to call it Beirut, and I kind of knew why after, because it was a war zone. And at this time, I was on a huge methadone maintenance script. I was knocking off chemists regularly just to get enough temazepam and diazepam inside myself, just to stop myself going psychotic, and heroin on top of that, and amphetamines and DFs and whatever I could get my hands on. And they very kindly gave me a week detox on 30 milligrams of codeine phosphate and some Valium, which was very kind of them, and then left me in the cell. And I kind of thought I'd experienced physical pain before, but the pain I went through physically in that cell was indescribable. I didn't sleep for probably 2 months. Every time the door would open, I would run straight to the recess, run a hot bath, and just lie in that hot bath just to get some heat into my bones, because I just was numbed out, just to warm myself up, and then run back in the cell, and then cycle a bike, pedalling away for 23 hours. And I swore to myself, having come through there, and it took me a good 3 months to just detox, and they wouldn't give me anything. After that week, I swore that there's absolutely no way would I ever use again after going through that kind of pain. Not heroin anyway. Other drugs possibly acceptable. I didn't really understand the term abstinence at this point. And sure enough, I got banged up with somebody and drugs come out. And, my will wasn't that strong. And I picked up. And I stopped, and I picked up, and I stopped, and I picked up, and I stopped, and I picked up. And I did that for the 18 months or 15 months I was behind that particular door. And I just couldn't stay stopped. I could get periods of time, but it wouldn't be anything significant. And it came to me getting out of, I got put into another jail. They always seem to like to put me in quite high security places. It's not because I'm particularly dangerous. I just think they're particularly fond of me. And I got released from another high security jail in Sutton. And one day prior before I got out, the idea of me getting out, probably for the first time in my life, the idea of me getting out into society absolutely and utterly terrified me. Because I knew exactly what I was getting out to. I knew exactly what I was getting out to. I was going out and I was going to use, and it was, for me, pure step one, because I had no power at all over it. As much as I didn't want to use, I knew that was going to happen. I just knew that was going to happen, and I didn't want it to. And that absolutely terrified me. I'd have rather spent my time locked up in that cell rather than go back out there to that utter insanity that was waiting for me. That sick, seedy madness that sometimes seems so attractive and still can. I managed to get hold of a where to find. I didn't even know what a where to find was. I just said, can I have a where to find? Not knowing what where to find was. And from somewhere, there was not meetings in this prison until probably 6 years later after I left, got me a where to find. I still have that original where to find. It has a slight sentimental value. And the reason why I got a where to find is that somebody told me about NA a very, very long time ago, and it was the mother of my daughter, who sadly is out there completely lost. If she's alive, I don't know. Told me about Narcotics Anonymous. This is a woman that's probably indirectly 4 or 5 people have got a long time clean in recovery, and she never got a day. Never got a day. God bless her. She had a good heart. She just hasn't been able to get this message, and that's who I think about when I get a moment's silence, often and off. But she told me about recovery and told me about these people that got together and talked about recovery and getting clean. But at the time that she told me about this, is that I wasn't ready. I just wasn't. I wanted to use. I was happy using. Thank you very much. I'm not interested. But somewhere something stuck in my mind, and this is why it's so important in this fellowship service and carrying a message to recovery, even to people that you think are reluctant, because you just do not know who you plant the seed in. I've seen people who thought about going to NA meetings, were forced to go to NA meetings in prison, and are out in recovery now for years. You just do not know who picks this message up, or when somebody's ready. The most important thing is we just get the message out to as many people as possible, regardless of how we do it, and that message was there, and I picked up a where to find, and I left that particular jail. I had no intention of using it, I just knew I needed it. I put it in my bag, I left in prison clothes. I didn't have any family anymore because they had to disown me, because they just couldn't handle it anymore. I'd lost my daughter. She'd been adopted when I was in prison. My brother had died from liver failure, from hepatitis C and alcoholism and using drugs. And I had nowhere to live. I had no home. I'd shot my liver with Hep C. Some of that was very familiar to me. I had a prison bag and I was going nowhere except to pick up. And I went back out there. I got put in a probation hostel in South London. And I went back out and I started using again. I ended up in a pub, drinking. I've been using a bit, and I was standing in the corner of this pub, absolutely terrified. Utterly terrified. And it was that point that I actually took the word to find out and went to an NA meeting. And it was in the Servite Hall in Chelsea. And I really loved the message, and I really, really identified with the people in there. And for me, I was blown away. But my scepticism went along with that meeting, and a lot of things I found very, very difficult taking on board. God, I couldn't get out of my head. I could not get the God word out of my head. I wasn't brought up in any kind of religious background, and I just thought that it was some kind of cult. It's some kind of brainwashing scheme. And I went to meetings for a little while, and I just thought that's fantastic. What I will take on board is this word, complete abstinence, after I found out what abstinence meant, because I'd never heard that word before. What does abstinence mean? Nothing? What, no alcohol, no cannabis, no pills, glue, petrol, anything? It's completely nothing. And I have to be honest, I've never picked up since I've been coming to NA, not once. From the day that I've walked through the door, I've not picked up. But that's just my story, because I was beaten. I knew I'd had enough. I just needed another way. But I wasn't allowing God's will to work in my life, and I always thought that my will was always better, and I'd always made sound judgments. And I just thought that as my will has always worked so well in the past, I'll let it take me back out there and lead my life as I did before without using anaesthetic. And I did that for quite some time. I did that for probably nearly 2 years. And I'd arrogantly come back to NA and pick up chips and think about all you people sitting there sharing and having sponsors and working the steps. How sad that must be. How sad that must be. I'm out there with this wonderful life, and I haven't picked up, and I don't have to do anything about it. That was my level of arrogance, that I just thought that my life's pretty damn rosy. And all you people have to come here and get really kind of sad. You all look sad to me. And what I was in complete denial, because I was in absolute, utter pain, because I had the same madness going on in my head as when I was using. I just didn't have any kind of anaesthetic anymore. It was all very raw. I had 1,000 voices in my head screaming. I still have a few voices in my head today, and they're talking. Maybe in another 10 years they might be whispering, but what I have come to accept is they're always going to be there. That's just me, But when I first came around, my head was 1,000,000 miles an hour. It was at light speed. I felt like I had somebody's hand wrapped around my brain, squeezing it. I couldn't sleep. I was insane. And what I didn't realise as well is that I thought that it was just about stopping using drugs, just about not using. And what I'd done when I went back out there is that I got into all the same behaviour. I was stealing cars, I was committing robberies, I was doing burglaries, I was cultivating cannabis, selling it, not smoking it, just growing it. And I thought that was perfectly acceptable behaviour. That's the way I grew up. These are the people I associated with. I like to knock around people who rob banks and shot people. I thought they were cool. This guy's done 20 years, respect, fantastic. It took me to go to that place to realise they were the same bullshit people, talking the same bullshit language, just have different methods of doing it, and just probably a little bit more extreme. Somewhere down the path, I'm sure I would have joined them and gone back on the same old merry cycle. And that, for me, took me back to the same place as it always did, which was the Crown Court. And I ended up in Crown Court on a really, really serious charge of aggravated burglary. And I'd never gone not guilty in my life before, and I did this time. because I knew that they were going to put me away for a long time. And well, even though I was in my madness, I hadn't used, and I had actually got some resemblance of normality. Like, my family come back into my life. I went to university, and I was in Crown Court, and the amount of anxiety that I went through. I mean, I've heard people say their worst, their worst day in recovery has been better than their best day in using. For me, that isn't true. It isn't true. I've had some absolutely fucking horrendous days in recovery that easily outshone anything that I was using, and that's just reality. I was in mega pain. And I got acquitted from this charge. I knew if I got convicted, I was going down, I was picking up, I was dead. Clear cut. I needed to go to that place for me. I don't recommend it to anybody, but that's my journey. I need to see black and white. I need to see that you can have a life over here, free from drugs and some kind of recovery, or you can go back to that old space. It's there, it's always going to be there, it's always going to welcome you. You can have it. But I had to take it to that really extreme point, and after I walked out on this hung jury, it was a big wake-up call. And I went back to the only place that I knew where that was an offer, the only place I've ever heard of. I came back here. And I tried it. I did all the things that were suggested to me that I never listened to the first time. I didn't go to meetings regularly. I never shared. I never had a sponsor. I never worked the 12 steps. I never did service. I had to do it. I had to do it because what else did I have to lose? My life. That was that simple. And I came back to this program and I went to meetings. As much as I hated it, and I still find it difficult to this day, is talk. Let people know how you feel. Ask people for help, because it's funny. You ask people for help and 9 times out of 10 they help you. Isn't that weird? Probably because I spent all my life screaming out for help and there was nobody there, and all of a sudden I got this huge amount of care and love in a room, and that was there for me, and it was unconditional. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I need a program. The only program I saw enough in this fellowship was 12 steps. For me today, I don't see what is the point of me being in a 12-step program if I'm not actively working 12 steps in Narcotics Anonymous. And I still work 12 steps in Narcotics Anonymous. I have a sponsor who I work those with, and I have sponsees who I work them with when they're willing. And that's been another big thing for me, is doing service and getting involved in this fellowship. And I've had for the first few years I had a real love and hate relationship with NA, and I've really struggled with some aspects of it, but I've kept turning up. I'm not going to say this is the only way to get clean and stay clean. I hear people say it and I don't believe it, because I know there are other ways. I just know that this is the most effective. I know this works for me, this addict. I've tried the other ways. I've tried them. They didn't work for me. And NA is proved on whole to be the most effective way. And one of the real things that I really struggled with, for me, that was a real struggle in NA, was God. The only time I had any connection with God when I was growing up was when I was in a cell. And I was saying, God, get me out of here. God, stop my stepfather beating me. God, stop this happening to me. That was the only ever connection I ever had. And I think what was even sadder than letting that relationship I had was just completely letting go of God altogether in my life and ignoring him. And I thought for me, and that had part to play for me not really getting involved in any in the first place. And I thought, I'll go and join a Buddhist monastery or a Vihara and learn about Buddhism. And I did that, and I thought, that's not going to work. Then I found a really attractive woman who took me to a church, and I thought, well, I could marry her, have some kids, I can do this. I can stand up there, preach, what have I got to do? Okay, baptised. So they stuck me under this kettle trough in Croydon. Interesting. Hallelujah, you're saved. Do you know what I mean? I was up there preaching in church and Jesus is good and da-da-da. And it didn't work. It didn't quite fill that void, you know. I was in church one day and I'd accidentally picked up the communion wine that had alcohol in it. I'd drunk it and I thought, fuck, that's nice. And I turned around to one of the guys in the congregation, I've just had a drink of alcohol. And he said, it's okay. It's all right, what's wrong with that? And I realised then I was in the wrong place. He didn't know the magnitude of me doing that I really liked it. No, I really, really liked it a lot, you know. And I kind of looked all the God in the wrong places, and you know, like most of us now, we have to look within, you know. And the relationship that I have with God today is something that I build up on. I don't jump down on my knees in the morning at 8 o'clock and pray, get down there before I go to bed and pray. I just pray all the time in my head. I try to connect up all the time in my head because it takes me out of my madness. You know, I try and live my life in the moment. I spend so much of my life either in the past, the future, or fantasy, and very little in the moment. And this is the only time that we're alive, it's here and now. You know, and doing service always puts me in the moment. That's a lie. 99% of the time, doing service puts me in the moment. It takes my mad head away because I'm still nuts. I've still got issues to deal with. I still find life incredibly painful. I still have to work 12 steps. I still need to meet my sponsor. You know, I still have to work this program because, you know, I'm an addict. You know, there's no end game to this. I have to keep coming to this fellowship, you know, because I don't want to pick up. You know, I do not want to pick up. I do not want to use. Yeah, I don't want to use, you know. And, you know, it's quite easy to talk about 40 minutes. I mean, when somebody first suggested that to me, I'm thinking, a few years ago, I thought, I haven't got anything to say. 40 minutes, you know. You know, there's a lot more that I could say. You know, but the most important thing that we do, all of us, is that we help one another. You know, I've often heard it said, this works is because we're all mad. You know, we're just not all mad at the same time. That's how it works. We're allowed to be mad. We're not different from anybody out there. It's just that I feel, for me, my ability to cope with my feelings is lacking a lot more. Everything is much more extreme, you know. My feelings seem to be much more extreme, or my ability to deal with them, so I fuck off and use things to change the way I feel. Some people might do it for a weekend. I generally do it for a lot longer periods of time. But the most important thing is that I've learned, and my sponsees have taught me as well, is that as long as you keep turning up, as long as you keep, doesn't matter if you're using, as long as you keep turning up, you've got a chance. No matter how many times you relapse, as if you've been coming to this fellowship 15 years and you still can't get it, as long as you keep turning up, at some point, when the time is right, which is God's time, it will happen. It will change. But you've got to be here for that to happen. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.